The rain had already washed most of the blood from her fingers when Arvin stumbled onto the scene, but the terror in her eyes told him she was seconds from collapsing. The billionaire heiress, unknown to him then, was half leaning out of the back seat of a luxury car, breathing in short sharp gasps, soaked in cold rain, trembling as though the world had suddenly turned against her. The street was bright with noon light bouncing off the wet pavement, yet everything felt dim and suffocating. Paparazzi cameras flashed from a distance, their silhouettes blurred in the downpour, capturing a moment she clearly didn't want the world to see. Arvin instinctively rushed forward, not realizing that this single act would change the entire trajectory of his life. If you're part of the ripple of love, and you believe hope survives even in broken places, like, comment, share, and subscribe so these stories can reach more hearts. Arvin had always been the type of man who moved toward chaos rather than away from it. Perhaps it was the way life had carved him, first losing his wife during childbirth, then raising his little daughter alone while juggling 2 jobs. He had built up a resilience born from necessity rather than choice. His days were a constant balancing act of exhaustion and determination, working as a hotel chauffeur in the afternoon and delivering groceries in the morning. Yet inside him lived a quiet yearning for tenderness, a desire for moments that reminded him that beauty existed even within the fragments of sorrow. When he reached the woman, she was struggling to stay upright, clutching her chest as though fighting some invisible force. Her red silk dress clung to her frame, heavy with rainwater, its color deepening into something almost tragic. She looked at Arvin with a silent plea, her wet hair sticking to her cheeks, her lips trembling. He realized she wasn't merely distressed, she was suffocating, overwhelmed in a panic that threatened to consume her. Without thinking, Arvin helped her to her knees, shielding her from the intrusive camera flashes as best as he could. Her breath came in sharp, uneven shivers. He recognized the signs. His late wife had suffered panic attacks during pregnancy. He knew what could help, what could ground someone spiraling out of control. His heart pounded with both fear and urgency as he cupped her face gently, urging her to focus on him. The storm around them blurred into insignificance as he leaned closer, anchoring her in the only way he knew would slow her spiraling breaths. Their lips touched, a grounding shock, a desperate attempt to bring her back. And just like before, when he had once saved a life that meant everything to him, the world stilled. The paparazzi cameras exploded with renewed fervor, capturing what looked like an intimate moment in the rain. Arvin realized too late what this would seem like, but the woman's breathing steadied, her trembling eased, and she blinked slowly as though awakening from a nightmare. Her name, he learned later, was Naira Valcrest, daughter of the feared and powerful billionaire, Garrick Valcrest. But at that moment, she was just a shattered soul clinging to the faintest thread of composure. Arvin wrapped his coat around her, ignoring the soaked fabric clinging to his own body. He guided her into the car, shielding her from prying eyes, whispering steady reassurance as she clutched his hand like a lifeline. When she was finally safe with her security team, he returned to his battered old motorcycle, soaked to the bone, trembling from more than the cold. He had no idea that someone was recording him, analyzing him, preparing for a phone call that would change his fate. The next morning, the call came while Arvin packed his daughter Naima's school lunch. The phone vibrated with an unfamiliar number, but he answered without hesitation. A voice, deep and commanding, cut straight through the quiet of his small apartment. It was a voice used to getting answers, used to controlling futures, and used to eliminating threats before they could grow roots. Arvin listened, frozen, as Garrick Valcrest introduced himself and demanded to meet in person immediately. The billionaire heiress's father. The man whose daughter Arvin had kissed. The man who could destroy his entire life with a single word. Arvin dropped Naima to school, his heartbeat uneven. His daughter sensed his unease and squeezed his arm gently, a small gesture that he always cherished. Her bright eyes carried a hope he desperately wanted to protect. He forced a smile, kissed her forehead, and told her to be brave today, even though his own courage was fraying at the edges. The drive to Valcrest Tower, a glass giant that speared the sky, felt like entering a different universe. Sunlight flickered off the massive reflective panels, illuminating the luxurious courtyard fountains. Arvin stepped inside the building, his damp palms betraying the fear he kept buried beneath layers of humility and exhaustion. Garrick's office was surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows offering a sweeping view of the sunlit city. The billionaire stood with his back turned, hands clasped behind him, rigid like a statue forged from power itself. When he finally faced Arvin, his expression was unreadable, a mask carved from cold authority. Arvin expected anger, threats, accusations. Instead, Garrick set a tablet in front of him. The kiss. Captured in the rain. Exploding across tabloids, social media, morning shows. Arvin's stomach dropped. But Garrick's voice, when he spoke, wasn't filled with rage. It was tired, worn with grief, almost hollow. Naira had been suffering silently for years, he explained, ever since losing her fiancé in a tragic accident that the media twisted into scandal. Panic attacks had become chains that bound her to a fragile existence. She trusted no one. She let no one close. The world had never given her a second chance. Yet in a moment of absolute vulnerability, she clung to Arvin, a stranger. Garrick studied him with eyes that could read entire histories. He asked Arvin who he truly was. Arvin spoke quietly but honestly, sharing the burdens of parenthood, the loneliness of nights spent soothing a crying infant alone, the endless grind of jobs that barely paid enough to survive, and the promise he made to his late wife, that he'd raise their daughter with goodness, no matter how imperfect the world was. It was the first time Arvin saw a crack in the billionaire's stone-cold exterior. Garrick exhaled slowly, then revealed why he had called. Not to accuse. Not to threaten. But to ask Arvin for something unimaginable. Naira had refused therapy for years, closed off to every attempt at healing. Yet after yesterday, she asked about him. The man who didn't use her vulnerability for gain. The man who shielded her instead of exploiting her. Garrick wanted Arvin to help Naira heal. Not romantically. Not through some forced arrangement. But simply by being someone who saw her as human, not as an asset or a scandal. Arvin's heart twisted. He didn't belong in that world. But he also couldn't ignore someone drowning in the same loneliness he once lived through. Days turned into weeks as he met Naira in quiet daytime gardens, sunlit cafes, and breezy terraces overlooking the city. She laughed softly for the first time in years, opening up about her fears, her sleepless nights, the guilt she carried from losing someone she loved. Arvin shared his own brokenness, not to compare pain, but to show her she wasn't alone in the darkness. Their connection wasn't romantic at first, it was gentle, delicate, born from two people recognizing the fractures in each other. And slowly, sunlight began to replace the shadows in Naira's eyes. As their lives intertwined, Arvin watched his daughter Naima brighten around Naira, as though sensing the warmth between the two adults. Naira found solace in Naima's innocent joy, and in return, Naima found a maternal softness she had never felt. If this story has touched your heart, support the journey by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. Before the final emotional moment, kindly comment what part of the story moved you the most and why. One evening, as the golden glow of sunset spilled across the horizon, Naira stood beside Arvin outside her father's estate. She looked at him not as a billionaire's daughter, not as someone the world constantly watched, but as a woman finally rediscovering the courage to live. She told him she didn't know what the future held, but she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: safety, trust, and the fragile beginnings of hope. Arvin felt his own walls loosen, realizing that for the first time since losing his wife, his heart no longer felt like a tomb. They walked into the warm evening light, not as savior and heiress, not as broken pieces, but as two souls finally learning that healing often begins when the right person takes your trembling hand and says, without words, that the storm has passed and a new day has begun. And somewhere above them, the sky, washed clean by rain and filled with the soft glow of sunset, watched quietly as two shattered lives began to weave themselves into something whole again.